Hello and welcome to yesterday's Airlines. Now in front of you in this video you can see the two most recently announced molds from ngmodels, which were the TU204-100 and the TU204-300. And in this video I want to discuss what NG should be doing next. Now there's a huge amount of opinion in this space, so I don't expect everyone to agree with my opinion, but nonetheless I'm going to try and use some measures to discuss, where they should be perhaps aiming their new mold creation in the future. So in part two of this video, we're going to take a look at what we think, or what I think, NG models should be making next in the wide body area. Now, wide bodies get a lot more attention than narrow bodies, and so there is less competition for that next slot. I think there are less types that need it. You certainly don't need any more A350s or 777s. I'm not even going to talk about those. And they've already got an A350 anyway. But there's still a variety of other wide bodies which I regularly get comments from people about saying, hey, I'd like to, to have someone, especially NG usually, look at making a version of this or a new version to compete with the old ones, or to produce models that have never been made before. So in this version of the video, the second part, we're going to look at some of those wide body models. You can see you've got three in the background there, but there's a couple of others too. And yeah, let's get started. So I'm going to begin with one that's not in the background. I'm going to begin with the Airbus A300. Now, the A300 has got some really good coverage in 400 scale, and that's mainly because of Aero Classics, and this is an Aero Classics A300 you're seeing here. And I think the mold is excellent. The only thing that is wrong with this mold is the fact that it has a seam, which is admittedly not too small, but nonetheless, that is the only thing wrong with the rest of the mold. Is awesome. Now sometimes AC don't print the windows, perfectly. They're a bit high, but in general, Aero Classics A300s are excellent. The only other thing I could say, which would go in favour of producing a new A300, I think, is that some of the releases are quite hard to get your hands on, as is often the case with Aero Classics. So, if we look at the other molds that have been produced over the years, they've not been great. The Dragon one isn't bad. The Blue Box one is, but there have been multiple molds, and mostly it has been Aero Classics that have used theirs, and theirs is far and away the best. So in terms of what's been made, there's been a large number of very high quality A300s. In terms of the importance of the type, yeah, it's an important type, but again, it's well covered. I personally don't feel that there's much need for any more A300s. I'm certainly happy with the ones I have from Aero Classics, and I would have to be something pretty impressive for me to start thinking about replacing them. So, if I had to score out of 3, what I thought the A300's chances were of getting made by NG models, I have to give it, well, let's say I'll give it a 1, though actually I'll probably give it lower than that. I actually really don't think that we need an A300. Moving on to my next type, and that is the, let's go with the 787-8, shall we, first off. I occasionally hear that people think there should be another 787-8, and all the comments I'm about to make also fit for the 777-200 too. Some people say, yeah, we should have another mold. And I'm thinking, really? I don't think we really do need that. Partly because Aviation 400 have just announced they're going to be making a new 787-8. So, that immediately means that you don't need 2 new versions of the same aircraft type. And in terms of the 777-200, jcwings have recently produced one which is spectacularly good as well. So again, you've got a new mold. You do need 2 new molds for a type that is relatively old? I don't think so. So really, I just don't see it. There's a good coverage of older molds. There aren't that many liveries that haven't been made, and realistically, it's not that important a type anyway. So I think that I'd have to give, again, a new 787, 1 out of 3. It's not required at this point in time, unless Aviation 400 make a real mess of theirs, which I'm sure they won't. Similarly for the 777-200, I think that Phoenix and jcwings have got this covered with their molds. I don't really feel the need to have another one. So again, 1 out of 3. Now next to it is perhaps slightly more controversial, and that's the Boeing 767. And this is a Phoenix 767, and it's a decent mould. Actually, it's one of the best moulds that Phoenix have left. It's seamless. It's got slotting wings. The Gemini version, which I've also got, doesn't have slotting wings, and it's a cradle mount, but it's still actually a nice mould. Both of them are good moulds. They're both a little bit old, but they're both good. And there have been a lot of 767-300s made in 400 scale. Obviously, they haven't made everything that's ever worn a livery on the type, but a good chunk of them have been made. They're not enormously rare or particularly sought after from what I see, and the old molds are good. So for me, yeah, doesn't need a new 767. You perhaps would do more than a 787 and more than an A300, but I don't really think that it's high on the priority list. These are good looking models, and personally I don't think that there's a shockingly huge demand or an enormous amount of unmade. Having said that, a bit more, so if it was out of 3, I'd say 2 out of 3. I think a 77, you know, I wouldn't be upset, and I'm sure I'd buy some of them, but would I replace a large number of the 76s in my collection? Yeah, maybe, but maybe not. Next up is the McDonnell Douglas DC-10. Now, only recently have I started hearing people talk about a new DC-10 mould, and I admit that some Aeroclassics releases are hard to find, but as with most Aeroclassics moulds, they use the mould a lot, and the mould is really, really nice. It is the best DC-10 in 400 scale. It is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful mould. So why do people want more on different moulds? Unless it's just to, you know, so that you can make ones which are hard to find, then I don't really feel that there's a huge market here. Are all those classics collectors with lots of Aeroclassics DC-10s really going to replace them just because you might put one aerial on the top? I don't think so. I think that the Aeroclassics 10 is fine. I don't really see a need to replace it. The only other thing that they could perhaps bring to the party, NG, if they made it, is making sure that their DC-1010 had different length wings to the DC-1030, but it's a tiny, small detail which you don't really notice on the actual aircraft. So yeah, there's some small areas of improvement that could be made. Yeah, there's AC don't necessarily get all the tail exhausts right. They don't always get the wing length right, but they're small. This is a good mould, a really good mould, and I probably wouldn't replace most of mine. So I don't think a 10 is high on the rankings. I'd give it 1 out of 3 again. Okay, so I've taken a look at the smaller wide-body moulds and what could be made. Now, obviously, what we haven't talked about are the larger ones. And far and away, the most obvious wide bodies, I think, that can be remade and should be remade in 400 scale are the 747s. Now, I really, really like this Big Bird mould, and it's had a bit of a renaissance being used by Aeroclassics recently. But the reality is, they're not going to make many more, if any more. It's a little bit long in the tooth in terms of the seam, lack of aerials, and fundamentally, they're almost impossible to find, older Aeroclassics and Big Bird 747s. So there's a huge demand. I hear it all the time from collectors that they really, really want 747s, and they're really missing those. There's a lot of older models which are actually good, but almost impossible to find at a reasonable price. And the 747-100 and 200 especially suffer in this area. So I think that 747-100 and 200 is a really, really high up there. You've got good old molds in places, often with poor quality printing if they're Dragon, and often impossible to find if they're Big Bird or Aeroclassics. You've got a huge range of liveries, which most of which would sell well because they're big airlines, classic airlines, and you know it's a really obvious choice. So for me, you know, if you're looking at those features, the molds, the quality, the liveries available, its importance in aviation history, then this one's stonking right up to the top when getting a 3 out of 3. So a 747-100, 200, I think will go down well with most collectors, and I imagine I'm not going to get a huge amount of argument about that in the comments. So 3 out of 3 for a 747-100, 200 here. Now the story's a little bit different with its larger brother, the Series 400 here, because there is a new 747-400 mould made by jcwings. This isn't it, this is a Dragon and it's a beauty, but there is a newer version. So do we need another 747-400? Yeah, I think we probably still do. The jcwings one isn't perfect, and they're just not going to use it enough. Fundamentally, they're never going to make airlines that collide with Gemini because they've got their deal with Gemini. They just don't make that many classic models, and there's a huge number of 400s again which are almost impossible to find in 400 scale because they're on the Big Bird Aero Classics models, which are so rare and so highly sought after. So again, I think the 400 is it really needs a mould that is going to get used regularly by the manufacturers, and I just don't see the jcwings mould being that version, unfortunately. So it's perhaps not quite as high up there as the 747-100-200. I'd give it maybe 2 out of 3 or 2.5 out of 3, but it's certainly much more needed and requested than the wide bodies you're seeing sitting in the background. So for me, it's clear as day that if NG are going to make another wide body, it ought to be a jumbo. A 400 would be nice. A new 100-200 to go with their SP would be nicer, and I'd be buying lots of those, and I imagine lots of people would, so it would be a surefire seller. So for me, the biggest wide body need that I can think of is the 747 Classics. Are they more important than the narrow bodies? Yeah, probably not actually. I'd probably prefer an MD-80 and a DC-910 over a 747, maybe even those early 707s, but wide bodies sell well, and so I suspect that we'll be seeing a 747 before we see narrow bodies. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, obviously like and subscribe. As always, check me out on Instagram at @YesToAirlines, follow me on Facebook, and check out the website where there's always exciting new news about 400 scale from the different manufacturers, releases, and so on and so forth. So yeah, keep an eye out. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you later.